You know that question, if you had to leave your home and you only had 10 minutes to gather all your things, what would you choose to take? It's not a new question. In fact, I suspect it's very similar to what our ancestors faced when they were freed from Egyptian bondage. You remember how they got the call? It was in the middle of the night. And this is how the Torah describes it. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house in which there was someone not dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go, worship the Lord as you said." That's pretty dramatic. They didn't have a lot of time. What did they take with them? By the way, it's a great question to ask during your Seder. What did they take with them? Because if you do just a little bit of investigating and a little bit of a reading of the Torah, it tells us. What did they take? Think about it for a moment. Take a thought. Just in your own mind, contemplate, what do you think they took? Well, they took unleavened bread, right? They took matzah. We don't want to forget that. It's so important that we begin the Magi, the telling of the story of the Seder, halachma anya, this is the bread of affliction. So that's the first one that comes to mind. What else did they take? They took timbrels. They took a musical instrument with them. Why did they take a musical instrument? So they could celebrate. You see, Miriam and the other women were so confident, so optimistic that God would make miracles for them and for the Israelite people, that they actually brought timbrels out of Egypt, their little hand drums, so to speak. And celebrate they did right after the crossing of the Red Sea. Okay? What else did they take? 5 things. They took gold and silver. They took gold and silver from the Egyptians. Actually, they didn't take it. I think the Hebrew word in the Torah is vayeshalu, which means they asked them for their gold and silver. And one of the commentaries is they asked them so that it would give the Egyptians the opportunity to do something nice for them, to almost make tshuva in a way, right? To repent in a way so that they wouldn't hate the Egyptians so much. Of course, later, they used the gold for what? To build the golden calf, exactly. So those 3 you may have come up with. You probably did. The matzah, if you will, the unleavened bread, the timbrels, and the third one, the gold. What's the 4th one? The last 2 are a little tougher. They took the bones of Joseph. You see, Joseph made them a promise that if they ever got out of Egypt, they would take his bones with them. So imagine, everyone's getting all their stuff together. What's Moses doing? He's finding Joseph's coffin and gathering up his bones to take them so they can leave Egypt with them. And you know what he does with those bones, by the way? When the Israelites received the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, they put the 10 Commandments in one of the arks and they put the bones of Yosef in another. So matzah, timbrels, gold and silver, Joseph's bones, and what's the 5th thing? What's the 5th thing they took? Boy, if you can come up with that one, you get to come to services next week for free. It's a great deal. Here it is. The Torah says, Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Chamushim. What are chamushim? Chamushim are arms, weapons. The Israelites left Egypt with weapons. How interesting. Even though there's a nation, this nation was protected by God, they took arms with them. Perhaps the Torah is teaching that people should do whatever they think is necessary to protect themselves, and then only if absolutely needed, God will intervene with a miracle. What's that teaching in the Talmud? Hope for a miracle, just don't depend on one. Rabbi Jack Reamer has a very interesting commentary on this Chamushim. He says, it's the only time in the Torah that the word is used. So he's not so convinced that it means arms. And the Midrash has a really interesting take on this. Now remember, this is Midrash, not Torah, but it's really interesting. What does Chamushim sound like? Good, Chamesh, the number 5. And so the Midrash says, Midrash Tanchuma says, that this teaches us that only 1 in 5 of the Israelites left Egypt. In fact, some of the rabbis say 1 in 50s, and some say 1 in 500. One rabbi comments only 1 in 5,000. The others stayed behind in Egypt. Now that's pretty shocking, isn't it? When they finally had the opportunity to be free after 400 years of oppression, only 1 in 5 or less actually left. Now the Israelites who left, they reached sort of the pinnacle. They got eternal glory. We read about them every year. We recount their journey in the Torah. We retrace their steps. The ones who stayed, we never hear from them again. Now, I don't know, none of us really will know if any of the Israelites stayed behind. But whether or not it's true, I think the Midrash is teaching us that it is very hard to leave what we know in life. It is very hard to leave home. And there are countless times in history that reflect it. Most of us remember during the years of Soviet Jewry and the terrible oppression under communist rule for decades in Russia. And then when we could finally leave in the 1980s, a lot moved, yes, but a lot stayed behind. It's hard to leave home. And how many of us know an elderly person who might need care in a nursing home? Or someone who perhaps shouldn't be living in such a large home but moving into smaller quarters, but they don't want to leave because it's hard to leave home. So remember what our ancestors took with them. They only had their proverbial 10 minutes. They took matzah and timbrels and gold and silver. They took the bones of Joseph, and yes, they took Chamushim, weapons. So as we approach Passover, I want to make a suggestion, particularly to our community as Reformed Jews, because as Reformed Jews, we tend to focus on mitzvot, on commandments that we see as ethical in nature. We're usually not as particular about ritual mitzvot. And yet, ritual mitzvot can be very meaningful and very important. So here's my suggestion. We should consider, all of us, being a little more observant of Passover for the full 7 days of the holiday. Whatever your level of observance, we can all be a little more careful about avoiding chametz, eating chametz, or even owning chametz. That's why, by the way, one of the traditional greetings is to wish a fellow Jew, Hag Kasher v'Sameach, have a kosher and happy holiday. So I consider all of us to elevate our levels of observance, because I think you'll find it both meaningful and make the holiday particularly powerful. That said, in addition to the 5 things that our ancestors took with them, they also gave us something. They gave us their story. So at our Seder tables, when we tell their story, how God freed our people from Egypt, it is as if we ourselves are redeemed. And we're supposed to do everything we can to feel as if we ourselves were being taken from Egypt. But let's add our own personal stories at the Seder. Think of the courage that it took. many of our grandparents or parents, indeed some of you here tonight, the courage it took to leave home, to come to a new land, to embrace a new culture, to learn a completely new language. I hope that our children hear these stories. I hope they fall in love with these stories, and when the time comes for them, that they will tell their children our stories. May the day come soon that we tell these stories in a world where people are no longer oppressed, in a world that's redeemed. And may we celebrate Passover with joy in our hearts and with gratitude to God. Shabbat Shalom.